Hi everyone, you're watching the Virtual Amicus and I'm Jay Lodha. So today we have a very interesting Q&A session that we've kept, and the topic for today's session would be on foreign law firms and getting dual qualified. Now, what do we mean by the term getting dual qualified? Is it holding two different degrees from one particular place? How does someone become eligible to be dual qualified? Who is suitable for this dual qualification? And what are the benefits of dual qualification? Now, when we talk about foreign law firms, how does one apply? How's the work experience like? How different is it from a normal Indian law firm that we apply or we get associated with? And how does it help? How does a dual qualified lawyer help in advancing in his or her legal career? So today we are joined by a very remarkable lawyer. She who boasts of an illustrious academic record. Well, there were so many achievements that we actually had to cut short given the time frame that we've got. So today we are joined, and in fact, I must reiterate when I say that this is our first ever international recording from London. That's right. So today we are joined by Miss Almitra Gupta, who is a capital market associate at Cleary, Gottlieb, Steen and Hamilton LLP, based in London area, UK. And just to give you all a brief introduction about her amicus for today's session, she specializes in equity and debt offerings. She also acts for issuers, underwriters in IPOs, straight debt issuers, MTN programs, etc. and etc. Prior to that, she served as she worked with Capital Markets Associate Linkletter, Singapore, and she did her master's full time from UPenn, USA. She also did her executive LLM from King's College London, and prior to that, she also has been a solicitor with the Bombay Incorporated Law Society, studied law and did her LLB from Government Law College, Mumbai, and then obviously the list of achievements goes on and on and on. So thank you so much, Ms. Gupta, for taking out time on a busy working day. Uh, Anything that you wish to say before we start with our session?
Well, thank you so much, Jay, for having me on this. It's my absolute honor and pleasure to be here. And I must say that the list of things that you spoke about me, I am. This is not being modest, but I think they all just happened in my career, one on one. Mostly because I was just truly passionate about law. I still am, and I continue to be. So it never felt like, oh my God, I need to study this, and then I want to do that. It felt more organic, and it came more naturally. So just want to say that so that people who are listening, they don't get intimidated by the number of things, because if where there is a will, there is a way, and that is incredibly true.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Gupta there. And I think we should quickly start with our session. So question number one, what do we mean by getting dual qualified? If you could elaborate a bit.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, dual qualified from an international perspective means that in general, it means that you're either qualified in the UK or in the US, along with your home jurisdiction's qualification. So for example, somebody like me who is Indian, for me being dual qualified means that I'm either qualified in the UK or I'm qualified in the US. So that's what dual qualification would mean for me. And in my case, what I did is that I pursued a master's degree in the United States, and then I qualified the New York bar. So that's why I'm dual qualified, because I am a qualified solicitor and advocate in India, as well as a New York qualified attorney now. So that makes me dual qualified. And in the event I'm qualified also in the UK, which I am still not, and I don't intend to do that because there's just so much to study, then that would make me triple qualified.
Right. So thank you so much there. Next question. How does one plan a career accordingly if someone wants to get dual qualification? And how does he route his career? How does he plan the scheme of things?
Sure. Yeah. So this question actually requires a lot to answer. So I think first and foremost, I can tell my journey. Why did I decide to be dual qualified? Number one was because let's take a step back in my journey. I was in government law college, and when I was in my third year of GLC, I decided to sign up my articleship with Juris Corp because I wanted to qualify as a solicitor. The reason I wanted to qualify as a solicitor was because obviously of the prestige. And more importantly, I thought that the amount detail and study and research that is involved in becoming a solicitor prepares you to be a more solid lawyer in the city of Bombay. So that's what was my driver to qualify as a solicitor. Then I chose to, do my articleship, and then when I passed out as a law graduate, I started working with Juriscorp, and I was rotating teams. So I was in litigation team for some time. I was in banking and finance, and I was in capital markets. And all throughout my stint with corporate teams, I realized that international trade agreements are always governed by either New York law or English and England and Wales laws. And the reason for that is because of the jurisprudential and jurisdictional certainty that these laws lend to international trade and commerce. And that was my primary driver to understand that, yes, I want to be dual qualified because it is important to get a deeper understanding of laws of those countries so that I am better placed to service my clients. So that was my driver. In deciding now, probably you may have a follow-on question, but before you ask me that, I'll probably jump the gun and answer that myself. Why did I choose to be qualified in the US versus England and Wales? Was because I realized that my interest was capital markets, and that is securities laws. And the holy grail of capital markets is the United States. That is the most established, jurisdiction of how shares and debentures and all of that emerged in history. And historically, it has very rich jurisprudence because the United States is an extremely litigious society. So for every and anything people litigate, and there is jurisprudence on it, there are precedents, there are obviously Supreme Court holdings and so many pronouncements that make the law a lot more robust there in terms of capital markets regulation. So I decided that it would be ideal for me to be qualified in New York versus England and Wales, and that's why I made that choice. So in terms of how somebody can go about it, you just need to decide which jurisdiction you want to qualify in, and you need to start pursuing that. And maybe I will wait for your other questions to answer how one can go about actually doing that.
Yeah, so coming to the exams, how many exams did you write or did you sit for? Is there any particular exam that you have to give, or if you could throw some light on that?
Yeah, sure. So let's be clear. So if I wanted to study in the England and Wales and I wanted to be English qualified, then all I need to do is give something called as QLTS exam, which stands for Qualified Lawyers Transfer Scheme. And I can give that sitting in India. I don't need to come and study in the UK, do another LLM. I don't need to do anything like that. I can sit in India, anywhere in the world, I can take the exam. That exam is split into two parts. One is called, I think the first one is the MCT, which stands for multiple choice test. And part two of the test is called the OSCE, OSCE, which basically, I do not remember what it stands for, but essentially it's more of a practical examination rather than a written test. So you need to pass the first level in order to move to the second level. The first level, as the name stands, it is multiple choice questions, 200 questions thrown at you. You need to, there is a 2-hour timeline, 200 questions to be answered in 2-hour timeline. And all these questions require students to answer not the right answer, but the best answer. And that makes it very difficult because you study laws of England and Wales, maybe 10 or 12 or 16 subjects roughly as an example. And you will be asked 200 questions on any subjects randomly, any of those, subtopics randomly. And once you pass the MCT, which has about a 60% or 65% pass rate, then you move to the OSCE stage, which is the objective situational clinical examination, which is a lot harder because if I'm not wrong, students need to come physically to London and they need to give that test where they need to interview a candidate, they need to demonstrate interviewing skills, litigation skills, ability to write a brief, ability to prepare a memo, submit a bail application, and all that. And once you pass that, then you are, officially England and Wales qualified, and you will be called to the bar. That's England and Wales qualification. Coming to the US side of qualifications, in the US, obviously the US is huge as a nation. You can choose to qualify in any state in the country. I chose New York because New York law is the most heavily, used law for capital market transactions. And it made most sense to do that because New York law is so sophisticated and so prestigious that it is recognized all over the world. So whether I were choosing to practice all my life in London, I would still be valued as a US qualified lawyer, or even in any other part of the world. In the United States, in order to be taking any bar exam, it is a prerequisite to do a full-time LLM course from an ABA accredited college. You cannot do, you cannot take the New York bar exam if you only sit out of India and just register for a test and give the test. That does not work like that. The only exception to that is California bar, which allows students to take the bar exam without doing a full-time LLM degree in the United States. And of course, that means that it's a little more hard than the New York bar. The New York bar itself is extremely hard in terms of answering your question, what did I have to study and how much did I have to prepare? The New York bar is again split into 2 days. There are three things to be cleared in order to be fully New York qualified. One is called NYLE, which stands for the New York Law Examination. It requires students to watch 14 hours of video lectures and answer questions at random intervals, which pop up during the video lectures. There is no option to pause the video or fast forward. And if you answer wrong, the video takes you back to point zero. So you need to complete those 14 hours of lectures. You can do it over a period of 2 months, whatever. You can pause once you have completed watching a particular section. So it could be criminal law, it could be United States constitutional law, United States estates law. So that's stage number one. Stage number two is something called as MPRE, which stands for the Model Professional Responsibility Exam, which essentially is nothing but a test to check whether you are ethical, whether you would be ethical as a lawyer. None of these exams are simple. They are extremely difficult because the United States examination pattern and method of study is very, very different and difficult as compared to what I had experienced in India. The whole examination pattern is filled with double negatives. All questions are double negatives, and they will ask you exceptions to the exception and therefore the inclusion. And it's very complicated to continuously keep thinking on your feet. But of course, with preparation and diligent studying, it's all manageable and possible. And then the third final exam is the New York bar exam, which once you pass all three, then you are finally a New York qualified attorney. So the last stage is the hardest stage, which is the New York bar exam, which comprises of 2 days. Day one is multiple choice test for 6 hours, 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon, and 200 questions each time. And you need to study 17 New York law subjects, ranging from constitution to real estate to succession, to securities laws, to corporate law, to finance, to criminology, everything, civil procedure of the New York State. And after that, day two is the MPT, which is basically model practical training, which essentially means that you are given two booklets. That is again a 6-hour exam. We are given two booklets. Booklet number one needs to be solved in 3 hours. Booklet number two needs to be solved in 3 hours. And one booklet is about 30 to 40 pages. That booklet basically tells you a fact pattern. It tells you this is what has happened, XYZ has happened, somebody has murdered somebody, or somebody's car hit another person on some random road. These are the fact situation. This person has taken that person to court. What is the brief that you will prepare on behalf of your client? That is what it asks you. And those two booklets can be any subject out of the 17 subjects that you have chosen and that you have studied for day one. So that's how the New York bar exam works. And it is very intense because what happens as Indian LLM students is that first, you have to do a full-time LLM program in order to be eligible to take the New York bar exam. Number two is that even when you sit for the bar exam, you have had only 2 months to prepare versus a regular American JD student. JD is equivalent to an LLB in India. So versus a JD American student who has studied and been and lived in the process for over 3 years' time. So JD in America is 3 years versus Indian LLB, which is a 5-year course or a 3-year course, depending on what you choose to do. But American legal system is very, very heavily integrated with its political system. So it's very important to understand American politics in order to be able to fully understand American legal system. They don't operate in isolation. You need to understand both to be able to understand why the court would have pronounced this. Was it a Republican judge? Was it a Democratic judge? What was the thought process? Who was the dissenting judge, and all of that. So obviously we are at a disadvantage as Indian LLM students because we are not born into the system. So we don't know the Congress and how it operates and the thinking very well. And most importantly, a JD student has studied, the procedures and everything for 3 years versus us who have only done a 1 year LLM, where we are spending so much money to do the LLM. So I would choose subjects of my choice versus choosing New York bar specific subjects, which are, a civil procedure or criminal procedure. I would never choose that in my LLM because I go to do an LLM to choose maybe media law or IP or securities laws, whatever, right? So that's what adds to the complexity and difficulty levels of that exam. And the pass percentage of international students in the New York bar exam is about 35%. First timers pass it. So it is quite a difficult and intense exam, and requires, I mean, if I were to be very, very honest, it requires 10 to 12 hours of study every day for a minimum 60 days, 2 months. So yeah.
So once you finish off with this procedure of dual qualification, what are the degrees that are awarded in the end of it? Uh, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I basically get the LLM degree from, I did my LLM at the University of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. So I got my UPenn LLM degree. I also did a business law certification course from Wharton Business School, which is in the campus of University of Pennsylvania. So my degree is an LLM degree and Wharton Business Law certification. Other than that, I'm a New York qualified attorney now. So I'm technically an esquire. Esquire is the equivalent of advocate in America. So I'm a New York qualified attorney / esquire in the United States, and I can, practice New York law now, and advise on New York law matters that are, where the governing law is New York law.
So for all the law students who are watching this, anything that you wish to say as far as the internship part is concerned, and suppose there is a law student in his 3rd or 4th year and he wishes to intern for a law firm which is based in New York, how does one apply? How will the application procedure be like? If you could throw some,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I would say first and foremost that it's very important for the purposes of full disclosure for everybody who's watching this, whoever even reaches out to me personally. I always tell them this, that getting a job in the United States or in the UK or anywhere today outside of your own home country, India, is extremely hard, very, very hard, because all these nations are becoming very closed in terms of immigration and, putting their national interests first, putting their interests of their own people first. And it's the son of the soils concept that we also have in India and Maharashtra. We see it so many times. So I think the point is that, one, is it difficult to get a job? Yes, it is incredibly hard. I'm not going to lie and sugarcoat and say it's very easy. Is it possible? Yes, it is still possible, but with a lot of hard work. And that hard work means you need to be smart about it. So what you need to do is that from the day that you decide to do a master's, whether it is in the UK or in the US, the only one thumb rule that you need to do apply is network, network, network. Network with people who are your age group, people who are senior to you, people who are junior to you, people who are super senior. Because networking is the way to find out what is it that interests you really. Do you really like what they do in their day-to-day lives? Asking people, taking them out for coffee chats, having informal conversations, bonding with people, not because you always want something from them, but because you just want to, form a bigger network and larger circle of people. That's very important, especially in the West, which we are never taught in India. There is a huge focus on networking and marketing yourself. If you're unable to do that, then unfortunately you stand very, very small chances of landing a job or anything, because that's how their system works. Their system works on self promotion. So I need to, so for example, what I did when I passed out of Penn, I did my LLM and my graduated in May, and my New York bar exam was scheduled in July. I told myself I'm doing nothing but only studying for the bar. So May, my graduation was done. June, July, 2 months, May half, June and July. I only studied for 10 to 12 hours each day. I did nothing other than that. My full focus was on just passing the New York bar, because the truth is that if you are not New York bar qualified, No American law firm wants you. You are of zero use to them. With your Indian qualification, it doesn't help. With your LLM degree, it doesn't help. Why it doesn't help? It's important to understand, because if, for example, I had not passed the New York bar exam and I had got an employment at Cleary, Gottlieb, Steen, and Hamilton, then what would happen is that for every transaction or matter that I was put on, there would have to be a senior supervising attorney who would have to qualify every work product of mine in order to be approved to reach the client. That's how the New York rules work. No work product can go to a client unless it comes from a New York qualified attorney. And if I was not qualified, the firm would have to bear the cost of hiring me, which is to pay me my salary, plus somebody else to continuously supervise my work at all points in time, which does not make any economic sense for them to hire you, right? So that's one. The second thing is that, in terms of, like I said, I only focused on studying and passing the New York bar exam. What I did after July was I decided to completely focus on networking and recruiting. So I had from July end, so say August 1st to about September, October, because October is generally when our student visa expires. And when that visa expires means we need to leave the country. So you either need to land a job before that, or you need to leave the country. So it's about 60, 65 days. During that time, I made an Excel sheet list of all the law firms in the US that I wanted to apply to. I went on their websites. I found out which department and team interests me the most, the work. So as a securities lawyers, if I applied to the litigation law firm or I applied to a litigation team of a law firm, it would make no sense because nobody would want to hire me. What is the value that I am bringing as an international student to their table? So I thought about it, and then I went about like making a list of the people in those law firm, the the partners who are handling or in charge or head of those teams. And then I started sending emails. And emails, I probably sent out at least 300. I got only 20 responses, which is absolutely okay. But you have to be mentally absolutely emotionally prepared to be able to deal with it, because at the end of the day, it only teaches you that whatever does not kill you only makes you stronger, and you come out more resilient knowing that it's fine. I put my best foot forward. So I sent about 300 emails, only 20 people responded. But do I hold grudges against the 280 who did not? No, it's completely okay. Probably today, when I end up getting so many emails, I try to respond to as many as I can, but there are times when you're not able to respond to somebody. And it's important for students to be mindful of that. And therefore, it is important to spread your wings a little. So, which means that if you identify 3 law firm partners in one law firm, send an email to all 3 of them. Don't just send to one person. Maybe that one person is supremely senior. Maybe that person does not care about these random emails. Maybe the second person really does, or is interested, or is a little junior partner. So that person has a little more time in to speak to you. And there is a lot that luck has to play in this. Luck has a huge role to play in this, actually. And I will say this, that with sincerity, that if you put your head down and you network with the goal to build meaningful relationships and friendships, you will stand to gain a lot more, rather than if you just focus on when am I going to get a job, who's going to give me an internship. Because unfortunately, the Western system does not work like that. They really want to see people who are invested in them, and who they can see for a long term. These are not short term stints.
Now that you've mentioned the importance of network, if I may ask, who was your mentor from law school who helped you, if at all you had one?
Right. I think that's a very interesting question. I mean, I cannot specifically point to one person from GLC who was my mentor, but I will say there are many people who played a crucial role in teaching me that networking is very, very important. Um, I will say that there were a lot of friends who played an important role, who had already gone to the US or the UK, and whose footsteps I wanted to follow. So reaching out to alumni on LinkedIn, freely reach out, don't hesitate. There are some alumni who also don't reply, and it's totally okay. There is no need to take things personally. I think the one thing that the United States taught me is to be a little thick skinned, which we are not taught back in India. So we tend to take everything very personally, we feel very bad. But in terms of who was my mentor, I will say that in Juriscorp, the people I worked with, they were so nice. and so invested in my growth that the founder partner, Jayesh, I really look up to him, respect him a lot. And at all points in time, I used to keep him updated of what I'm doing, where I'm headed to, what I'm thinking of doing. And it's not that we spoke every day, not even once in 2 months, but whenever we did, I used to get nuggets of wisdom from him. And he had told me to read one book, which is called Never Eat Alone by Keith Farazi. And I recommend that book to everybody. That book has 10 top tips of how to network, and it is fantastic because it's a very action pointed book. It tells you exactly what to do, how to go about sending those emails. Always send a thank you email within 24 hours of meeting somebody, because out of sight is out of mind. How to keep top of mind, how to reach out to people. So for example, one of the tips that I had received was, if I like a particular professor who of my law school, who has been an ex partner at a law firm that I want to go to, I would look at what their research is like, which subjects do they generally research. Of course, if it interests me, I will send an email saying that, I've read this research paper. And be genuine. You have to actually do the work. You have to actually read the research paper and say that this thing in your research paper, your theory of, XYZ really interested me and I was keen on learning more, or just speaking with you. Would you have some time for a coffee chat? And the truth is, people are very happy to speak about themselves all the time. So you'll always find people to speak to and who will be interested in investing in you if you are authentic and interested in investing in yourself.
So you've done two LLMs. One is the executive LLM, the other is the full-time from UPenn. If you could explain the difference between the two.
Yeah, sure. So I think the executive LLM that I did was, not a full-time course. I had to be in London for about 6 months in a span of 18 months. The difference is that executive LLM, as the name stands, it is for executives. It is mostly for quite senior people. I was actually the junior most in my class and my batch. The executive LLM at King's College London only offers admission to 25 students across the globe. I was the youngest, and the people I shared my classroom with, somebody was a partner at a law firm in the United States. Somebody was actually the chairman of Tax Court of Appeal in Trinidad. Somebody was, a judge in one of the Supreme Courts of a country in the Caribbean islands. So I think what happens is that the executive LLM gave me the exposure to meeting people who are a lot more senior. So it opened my mind to very different perspectives. The reason I even went ahead to do a full-time LLM in the US was primarily because the executive LLM had given me a feel or taste, like a trailer of what it means to study abroad and what it means to assimilate and speak to people from different cultures and communities around the world. The full-time LLM is obviously a full-time course where I need to physically be present for a period of 12 months. I take the course, I am attending classes. Of course, this is a non-COVID world. I was in a non-COVID world by God's grace, so it was different then. But executive LLM is, I would say, it should be only done by people who are mid to senior in their career, number one. Number two, where you don't need to just get specialized knowledge of a particular subject. But for example, I had subjects like negotiation, difficult conversations in a hard setting, where we actually had practical classes. We were given scenarios and we had to talk to another person in the classroom about a difficult situation in a hard setting. If I'm in a boardroom, example, the setting I was given, that you're in a boardroom and, I, as a woman, I'm going to be ousted by the boardroom because of certain issues. What are the implications from a diversity inclusion perspective? So having those conversations, that's the kind of thing that the executive LLM does, versus a full-time LLM is more focused on the subject area.
All right. So, if in a nutshell, you could explain us the difference between the legal landscape of UK and the legal landscape of US in terms of the work culture or the opportunities that are offered in your experiences. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I can definitely speak only to my experience, so I will fully caveat with that first. This is just completely my views, nobody else's. In terms of the landscape of work, I would say, firstly, to get a job is extremely hard in both countries. Neither is easy, and therefore the only way is network, network, network. Number two, in terms of work culture, it both are extremely collaborative work cultures, where people value your personal time, where people respect that you have a life beyond law and the work. That is not to say that you don't have any crazy hours. I still have many crazy hours, but that is just the nature of the profile. But it also means that suppose if I've had 4 a.m. nights, there will be team members who will say that you should really get rest for the next 2 days. So please go ahead and take 2 days off. We will cover for you. It's a very, very collaborative, collegial environment, especially where I'm working right now. It's an amazing law firm where people are truly invested in your well-being, and people look out for each other, and there is no cutthroat competition or sharp elbows within the firm between people, because everybody is very secure in their own merit and potential. um, and I think the best thing about working abroad, whether I worked at Linklater Singapore or now here, is the exposure to different kinds of talent. When I was in Singapore, I had a phenomenal experience at Linklaters where I interacted with people who had studied at Oxbridge, Oxford, Cambridge. Somebody went to Harvard Law, different law schools, different thought processes, different nationalities. Somebody was Malaysian, somebody was Singaporean, somebody was from Hong Kong, somebody was from China, Vietnam, somebody was American. Just being in a room filled with different cultures makes you a lot more amenable to different thought processes, and realizing that there is a lot more in the world, rather than what we probably thought of. So I think just being aware of different thought processes is something that's greatly beneficial. In terms of the opportunities, both countries give tremendous opportunities. If you decide to put your head down, work hard, qualify yourself, do well, and be diligent. I think just hard work, sincerity, and diligence, it can take you a long way in both these countries, because even on also in Singapore, because at the end of the day, what people care about is whether you are invested and sincere and putting your best foot forward. Because authenticity comes through, and if you are not authentic, that also comes through. So I think the world is an oyster if you decide to pursue opportunities overseas.
And lastly, if you could explain your role as an associate with the capital markets team, how different is it from the role that you have adorned, in law firms that are based in India, quite particularly in Bombay and other parts of the country?
Yeah, sure. So I think, what my role is here, I will answer that first, and how it compares with what I did back in India next. So I think in terms of my role right now, I'm a capital markets associate. So what it means is that I am working and helping companies raise funds from the equity capital markets or the debt capital markets. And these companies are sometimes based in Europe, all across Europe, Scandinavian countries, some companies based in Dubai, some companies based in Russia, across the globe, who want to raise funds. Say, for example, they want to do something which will have a socio-economic impact. For example, I worked for a company which wanted to, manufacture more vaccines and drugs for curing COVID-19. And so when you work for something like this, what you are essentially doing as a lawyer is I'm helping doing the documentation, through which the company will put that offer document out to the investors, and list itself either on the Singapore Stock Exchange or the London Stock Exchange or the Belgium Stock Exchange or the New York Stock Exchange, in order to raise funds from public capital markets. So that's what my role comprises right now. How is it different from my role back in India? I would say it's substantially different, because here I'm practicing New York law. So most of the clients that I work with are primarily wanting to list on the NASDAQ or the NYSE, which is the New York Stock Exchange. And the rules of the NASDAQ or NYSE are very, very complicated, a lot more robust, because they have developed over many, many more years, than compared to Indian capital markets regulation, which is a little more newer in comparison. But the theme of the law is investor protection. So I essentially am trying to always draft and prepare documents where I try to ensure that the company is making full disclosure to the investors. If there is something wrong in the company, then I'm doing my diligence properly so that investors are given upfront notice about it. Say, for example, a company is involved in a big scandal. It does not know what the court will hold against it, or whether the court will hold in favor of it. But making appropriate disclosures in my offer document so that tomorrow an investor who loses money, example, by investing in this company, does not come and sue my client. So just thinking about all those things is very different. And I will say that in the West, there is a heavy push to be a more quality focused lawyer than quantity. And that's just by nature of the fact that Asia as a market is more predominantly quantity heavy. And there are a lot of pricing pressures in Asia because labor is cheaper than in the West. So what happens is that in order for an Indian law firm to be profitable, they need to do more number of a particular deal. But in the West, you can do 1 or 2 deals of the same nature and you will be more profitable, because what matters here is quality over quantity. So I think that is a big difference that I see. A year at any given point in time, I may not be doing 7 or 10 matters, or not even 4, but whatever I'm doing, I'm required to do a very solid, thorough job. I really think about legal issues, really pick up the books, think about what this case law said, why was the dissent given, why did they draft the document like this, how can it impact investor protection, what corporate governance norms should be changed, how should the board of executives compensation be determined, how can it impact what a shareholder activist might think of it. So here it makes me a lot more solid lawyer, so to speak, than fundamentally solid lawyer is what I would say.
Wow, what an incredible journey this has been. I guess this is what the virtual amicus is all about. Anything that you wish to say before we wrap up our segment to the young lawyers and young law students who are watching, who wish to have an illustrious academic record like you have?
No, thank you so much for again just giving me this opportunity to speak here. I would only say that be sincere and authentic to yourself. You are your own best self, and there is nobody else who is youer than you. Don't try to emulate other people blindly. Don't think that life at X law firm or Y law firm looks very fancy, because the truth is that there are lots of sleepless nights, a lot of hard work that comes with all of this. So while LinkedIn profiles look very fancy, there is a lot of story behind it, is what I would say. So pay attention to that. Don't just get fancied by, oh wow, I mean, look at what this person is doing, this person is going here, there. I used to be like that too. It's very natural and humane, but recognize that they have their own share of hardships. It's not all glamorous and glorious in the inside. It's a lot of sweat, blood, especially when you are outside of India, because you don't have social support system. Your family is not here. It is quite hard. It is incredibly hard. But I think days that are most exhausting are days that are most fulfilling. So if you are determined to create an impact and do something meaningful, you can do it anywhere. You don't need to specifically be in the US or UK. Anything, anywhere you can make an impact if you choose to make an impact. So yeah, that's my only advice.
So thank you so much there, Ms. Gupta, for taking out time. And I think this segment means a lot to all the viewers who are watching. This will immensely benefit all those who have been glued, ever since we started this segment. And thank you so much once again to all the viewers. Our email is mentioned on the channel. So in case if you have any queries with respect to any of the fundamentals or concepts, or with respect to any of the courses that Mrs. Gupta spoke about, feel free to write to us. We'll be more than happy to forward the same to our amicus for today's session, or you can independently or directly write to her. She'll be more than happy to assist you. So thank you so much to all the viewers. Thank you so much, Ms. Gupta, once again. Stay tuned. Next episode is on its way. It's goodbye for now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much, Jay. Thank you.